The first time they called him Grandpa Rambo. I laughed, but not for the reason they thought. Our neighborhood's HOA patrol, a bunch of wannabe tough guys with clipboards and cheap sunglasses, had decided my grandfather was some kind of threat, said he wasn't in compliance with lawn height regulations. Really, they just didn't like that he didn't smile when they strutted by. He kept to himself. Quiet, always watching. Me? I grew up thinking he was just some grumpy old man with a 1,000-yard stare and a basement full of locks on every door. Turns out, I didn't know him at all. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next ended up all over the country. It all started the week after my granddad moved in with us. Mom said he needed help, but honestly, it felt like he was there to watch us. The man barely slept. Every morning at 4 a.m., he'd be out front, pacing the sidewalk with a cup of black coffee. No cream, no sugar, like he was guarding the house. The HOA patrol didn't take kindly to it. They said he was creating unease in the neighborhood, called him paranoid, said he made the kids nervous. I told him he was harmless, but that wasn't the whole truth, not even close. Then one day, they showed up in uniforms, fake ones with homemade badges, and told my grandfather he needed to step inside. That's when everything started to unravel, because instead of backing down, he smiled. A slow, quiet smile, the kind that says, "You just made a mistake you'll regret forever." That smile chilled me to my core. It was the first time I'd ever seen it, like he knew something the rest of the U.S. didn't. The HOA guys clearly thought they were in control, puffing their chests out like mall cops with a god complex. One of them, a guy named Bryce, actually poked my granddad in the chest. "This is a community of rules," he sneered. "And if you think you're above 'em, old man, we will handle it." My grandfather didn't flinch, didn't say a word, just stared at Bryce until the guy's smirk started to wobble. I remember standing on the porch, clutching my phone, thinking I should film it. Something told me this wasn't going to go the way anyone expected, but before I could press record, my granddad stepped forward and in one fluid motion, grabbed Bryce's wrist and twisted. Not violently, just precise. Bryce dropped the clipboard, eyes wide. "That's a radial nerve," my grandfather said calmly. "Takes about 2 pounds of pressure to snap it. Wouldn't take much more to drop you." The silence was deafening. The other HOA guy, a younger guy named Seth, took a half step back. That's when Mom ran out. She was furious, shouting at Grandpa, shouting at the HOA, demanding to know what the hell was going on. Grandpa just raised his hands and said, "They touched me first," which was technically true. But no one moved, not until Bryce muttered something about calling the police, and the two of them stormed off. Later that night, as I helped Grandpa sweep up the broken clipboard pieces from the driveway, I asked him where he learned that move. He didn't look up, just said, "I've lived a lot of lives, kid. This is just a quiet one." The next morning, things got weird. Like, deliberately weird. Bryce and Seth came back, this time with 3 more guys, what looked like a printed citation taped to our front door. Failure to comply with HOA Code 12B. Suspicious loitering. Loitering. In his own front yard. My mom was livid. I swear, she nearly ripped the sign off with her teeth. Grandpa didn't say a word, just watched them from the porch, arms crossed, like he was mentally mapping their movements. That night, he disappeared. He left a note on the kitchen table. Went for a walk. Don't wait up. I tried to call him. No answer. Midnight rolled around, and I found myself pacing the living room, imagining the worst. What if they'd done something to him? What if he was out there wandering the neighborhood, confused? I was about to go out searching when the back door creaked open. Grandpa walked in, calm as ever, boots muddy, a scrape across one knuckle. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then tossed something onto the table. A tiny black audio recorder. I stared at it. "What's that?" He didn't answer, just poured himself some water and said, "Your HOA friends are playing dirtier than you think. That Bryce kid? He's not just faking a badge. He's running surveillance, checking mailboxes, tracking cars. Saw him planting something near the Jensen's fence line. I thought he was paranoid until he pressed play. The recording crackled, and then voices, clear as day. Bryce and Seth, talking about teaching the old guy a lesson, and something about making him disappear if he got too nosy. I looked up, stunned. Grandpa just said, "I warned you." This isn't my first rodeo. By sunrise, Grandpa was gone again. But this time, he left 2 notes, one for me and one for Mom. Mine just said, "Trust me and stay alert." Hers? I never saw it. But whatever it said made her eyes go glassy and her hands shake for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, things in the neighborhood were off, real off. HOA patrols doubled, cars creeping slow past our house. Bryce even brought in some new guy who looked ex-military, buzz-cut, tattoo sleeve, mirrored shades. They were acting like they owned the block, knocking on doors, talking to neighbors like they were building a case for something. Then around 5 p.m., someone knocked on our door. It wasn't Bryce. It wasn't Seth. It was 2 men in suits. Real ones. Federal-looking. One flashed a badge too fast for me to read and asked if we'd seen a man matching the description of Robert McAllister. My mom froze. Said no. Said we didn't know that name. The agents exchanged a look and handed her a card. "If he contacts you," one of them said, "call us for your safety." As soon as they left, Mom locked every door in the house and sat down hard at the kitchen table. "You lied to me," I whispered. Her voice cracked when she answered. "I didn't lie. I just never told you. He's not who you think he is." And then she told me everything. About how he disappeared for 8 years after Vietnam. How he never talked about what he did, but there were whispers, black ops, burn lists, sanctioned hits. About how the name McAllister wasn't even his real name. "Your grandfather," she said, "was retired. He was relocated. Under orders." I didn't sleep that night. The next day, CNN was playing in the background while Mom and I sat in silence. I was trying to process it all. The recorder, the feds, the fake name. When the segment changed and the anchor's voice cut in. "Breaking now. Leaked footage from an alleged undercover operation in rural Tennessee appears to show a former U.S. intelligence asset confronting what experts are calling an unauthorized civilian surveillance ring." The screen flicked to grainy nighttime footage, security camera quality, of a figure in a hoodie approaching a parked SUV. The license plate was blurred, but I recognized the gait instantly. It was him, my grandfather. He knelt beside the car, fiddled with something underneath, then walked away. Mom stood slowly, her hand covering her mouth. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. The footage switched again, this time to a hidden body cam clip. Bryce and his goons were inside someone's garage, weapons laid out on a table. Not real ones, tasers, batons, pepper spray, and what looked like police-grade comms gear. "We'll call it a citizen's arrest," Bryce said on the tape. "We cuffed the old guy, drag him into the van, dump him somewhere quiet. Who's going to miss him?" Mom gasped, but the anchor wasn't finished. Federal investigators are now reviewing the footage. Sources say the man identified as Robert McAllister was operating under protective clearance, his past sealed by national security orders. Local officials have declined to comment, but sources confirm a formal inquiry has been opened into the HOA Enforcement Committee. I looked at my mom. "He's not just some old guy with a haunted stare, is he?" She shook her head, whispering, "No, he's the guy they call when they need ghosts to disappear." That night, the front door creaked open. He was back, and he wasn't alone. He didn't look like my grandpa when he came back in. Same face, same clothes, but something was different. His shoulders were squared, his steps quiet. He wasn't moving like an old man anymore. He was moving like someone trained not to be seen. And behind him, stepping carefully into our foyer, was a woman, early 50s, dressed like a librarian but with eyes that could cut steel. "This is Elise," he said. "Old friend." She nodded at us, then turned to him. "We've got about 3 hours before they realize what's happening." I just stared. "What is happening?" Grandpa took off his jacket, laid it on the table, and pulled out a folded map. "They're not just HOA punks. Bryce and the others? They're ex-contractors, failed out of private security, tried to start a neighborhood watch program that turned into a racket. First it was parking tickets, then code violations. Now they're targeting people with no support, retirees, single moms, veterans, quiet people, like me. Elise added, we intercepted comms from their radios. They're planning a full takedown tonight. You're the example they want to make. Mom looked like she was going to be sick. We're leaving, she whispered. But Grandpa shook his head. No, not until it's over. He handed me an old burner phone. If anything happens, if we get separated, this will ping my location every 30 seconds. You keep it on you. And whatever happens, you do not open the door unless I say your name. I nodded, barely able to breathe. Then Elise pulled something out of her coat. A flash drive. And this, she said, is what blows it all open. Bank transfers, contracts, off-the-books payments, everything. I looked at Grandpa. He smiled just barely. Time to clean house. The plan wasn't complicated. It was surgical. Grandpa and Elise had done this before. Not in neighborhoods, maybe, but the rhythm was the same. Isolate, expose, neutralize. While Mom and I stayed holed up in the house with the blinds drawn, they set motion sensors in the yard and rigged a small camera in the porch light fixture. They'll come through the back, Grandpa muttered, like he was narrating a memory. They always do. He wasn't wrong. By midnight, the street was dead quiet. No cars, no dogs barking, no wind. Then we saw the signal. The porch light blinked twice, then went dark. On the screen in front of us, a tiny black and white monitor Elise had pulled from a duffel. 3 figures moved across our backyard. Bryce, Seth, and the buzzcut guy, all dressed in black. One held zip ties. The other had a taser. They weren't playing anymore. Elise leaned into Mike on her collar and whispered, "Rabbit in the trap." That's when Grandpa stepped out from the shadows behind the shed. He didn't shout, didn't warn, just moved. Fast, quiet, efficient, like every second counted. Bryce turned first, too slow. He went down with a grunt as Grandpa twisted the taser from his hand and dropped him with a knee to the gut. Seth bolted, but Elise was already moving, catching him with what looked like a taser baton. He crumpled like a sack of laundry. The buzzcut guy? He stood frozen, just long enough for the red and blue glow to wash across the lawn. 2 police cruisers pulled up, sirens off but lights spinning. Officers poured out, and behind them, 2 men in suits. Real ones this time. Same agents from before. And this time, they weren't asking questions. What happened next didn't feel real. 1 minute. Bryce was face down in the grass, zip ties digging into his own wrists. The next, he was being hauled up by 2 federal agents like a sack of trash. Seth was already in the back of a cruiser, mumbling something about misunderstood authority. And buzzcut guy? He tried to run, made it halfway across the street before Elise stepped in front of him like a ghost, cool and calm, and held up her badge. Not an ID, a badge. Federal Task Force, she said. You're done. I turned to my mom, stunned. She's an agent? Mom's voice was hoarse. She was, same unit as your grandfather. They retired together, but she came back for this. The agents pulled us aside to take statements while officers combed the property. Grandpa stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching it all play out like a man who'd seen too many endings like this before. Every once in a while, he'd glance up at the porch light, the one that blinked to signal the trap was sprung, and almost smile. One of the agents approached us. He was holding the flash drive Elise had given him earlier. We ran the files, he said. It's bigger than we thought. These guys weren't just extorting homeowners. They were trafficking data, surveillance footage, plate numbers, personal files, selling them, weaponizing them. Bryce wasn't a wannabe. He was a hired eye for a private firm out of state. I felt sick. Grandpa just nodded. That's why I came back. Someone had to shut it down before it spread. They didn't arrest him, didn't question him, just shook his hand like he was one of theirs, someone they'd read about in a briefing room, maybe once upon a time. And then they left. The next morning, Our neighborhood felt like it had been flipped inside out. The HOA sign out front had been taken down. Bryce's SUV was towed away at sunrise. Seth's house? Vacant. The cops had slapped a notice on the front door, evidence collection in progress. No one was mowing lawns or walking dogs. Just a stunned, creeping quiet like everyone was waiting to find out what it all meant. Grandpa didn't say much. Just brewed his black coffee and sat on the porch like he'd always done, like none of it had happened. Except now, nobody complained. The strangest part? The neighbors started talking to us. People who'd never said more than a polite wave were now stopping by to check in. One older guy even brought over a pie. Said a security camera had caught Bryce rifling through his recycling bins at night, and he'd never known what to do. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, he admitted. Grandpa just gave him a slow nod. You weren't. Mom finally exhaled that afternoon. She hugged Grandpa tighter than I'd ever seen before, whispered something I didn't catch. He just squeezed her shoulder and said, "Don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." That night, we sat on the porch, the three of us, for the first time in weeks. No patrols passed by, no slow-cruising SUVs, just cicadas and warm wind. I turned to him and asked, "Will they come back?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the stars like they were familiar faces. "If they're smart, they won't," he finally said. "But if they do, they'll find I've still got one or two tricks left." And I believed him, because under the wrinkles and silence, there was still a man trained for shadows. A few days later, a black car pulled up in front of our house. Not a police cruiser, not one of those government SUVs. Just a simple sedan with tinted windows, and a man in a dark coat behind the wheel. Grandpa stood when he saw it, not surprised, not tense. Just ready. He stepped off the porch and walked over without a word. The man got out, nodded once, and handed him a sealed envelope. No names, no instructions. Grandpa took it, opened it slowly, and scanned the contents. Then he nodded and smiled, for real this time. When he came back inside, he looked lighter, like something had been lifted. "What was that?" I asked. He handed me the paper. It was a single sentence, typed in bold. Operation Severance officially declassified. Mom covered her mouth. He just said, "It's over." The next morning, he packed a single duffel and handed me a folded piece of paper. On it were two things: a list of names and a handwritten message. "If anything happens to me, call Elise. Give her these. You'll be all right." I wanted to argue. Tell him he didn't have to leave. That we could figure out all of it together. But he shook his head. "You've got your life to live. And I've got ghosts to bury. I'll be back when I've finished." And just like that, he was gone. He left before sunrise, the porch light still blinking faintly in the early dawn. No goodbye speech. No lingering hugs. Just a nod and that same slow, quiet smile. The one that said, "I've seen worse. I've done worse. And I've survived all of it." A week later, CNN ran a follow-up. Anonymous source helps dismantle rogue surveillance ring. Investigation ongoing. No names. No photos. But I knew. And somewhere out there, so did the rest of them.